1 week season.
Hello, friends and Inner Circle fam. Welcome back to a Week 9 edition of the 2024 OWS Roster Review Pod. I'm your host, StatATL. So this week, we're going to be reviewing about a dozen rosters, and we're going to hop in with a 20 max build from Inner Circle member Swedish Woman Fan. So this is a Jameis Winston double stack with both Tillman and David Njoku and no bringback. So a really strong start here, and my most common 3-player block. So I really liked that. You've got Jamar Chase and A.J. Brown here in a mini correlation. I really liked this, especially with T. Higgins out. The roster also features DeAndre Swift and Devon Achane, both as one-offs. Really did like that. So I played a really tight player pool, probably less than 40 total players across my 150 set, and had both Swift and Achane in my group of 10 running backs. And I went about 20 or 30% exposure on both, just kind of across the board on all 10 running backs, kind of mixing and matching. So really did like Swift and Achane here. The final piece of this roster is Cade Otton. We spoke about how Otton was likely to be the biggest beneficiary of Evans and Godwin both missing. And then you finally have the Lions D here, so very sharp. Great build, kind of shows that despite having 5 players at greater than 20% ownership, you can still build a solid lineup that competes for first, uniquely, and, you built it differently than the field. So thank you for the submission this week, and great hit, Swedish Woman Fan. So the next roster comes from Inner Circle member Pete G. This is an Atlanta and Tampa game overstack here. As you see, it is a Baker Mayfield double with Otton and McMillan, and you brought it back with both Bijan and Darnell Mooney. So, a unique way of building around this game. I think most people just picked one-off plays from this game. This is a unique way of really leaning into this matchup. Roster then has Gibbs and Ridley in a mini correlation. So on my DFS labs this week, we spoke about Calvin Ridley and how the likeliest scenario had Tennessee trailing, and with Hopkins gone, where are those vacated targets likely to go? And we talked about I think there was 6 or 7 really strong games against Detroit from opposing wide receivers already. So I felt like 20 to 25 points well within the range of outcomes for Ridley, and somebody who was likely to be low owned. So I didn't get to Gibbs personally, but I did like this mini correlation here. And then you've got Joe Mixon here as the final piece. So JM spoke about a rule of at least one Texan on every lineup. Something I actually tailed, was an approach I was a big fan of this week. So nice correlation on this roster. Great result. And thank you for the submission this week, Pete G. So the next roster comes from Inner Circle member Dogman. It's a $12 single entry. And this is a CJ Stroud double stack with both Mixon and Tank Dell. No bring back. So I also built a Stroud double stack with Mixon on my DFS Labs episode this last week. So I really liked this start. You then leaned into the Dolphins offense with both Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill. So I really liked this with Tua back. Kind of the core Dolphins pieces were all underpriced. Ownership reflected that, as you see, with 20% on Achane and 35 on Tyreek Hill. So I like that you kind of got different here by playing both together. Something I did as well. I thought that was a really sharp approach this week. The roster then features both Cade Otton and Cedric Tillman, the 2 best value plays on the slate. Both guys I was really over the field with as well, especially Tillman. I think I had a little over 80%. And then the final piece on this build is Lad McConkey. I like that you leaned into a late swap suggestion here at low ownership. Got you 32 points. Obviously, a career best game for him, but within his range of outcomes. Not surprised to see you lean into Lad McConkey with your UGA avatar. But thank you for the submission this week and a solid result, Snowbird. So the next roster comes from Inner Circle member VinnieB. This is a $27 single entry with 7,000 entrants. As you see, it is a Jaden Daniels skinny stack with Terry McLaurin, and you brought it back with DeAndre Swift. So a really great way to build around this game here, Vinny. The roster also features Gibbs and Calvin Ridley in a mini correlation. So we spoke about that on the last roster. Really liked this. Was high on Ridley myself. You've then also got J.K. Dobbins and the Chargers in a mini correlation. I really liked that. Something I did frequently myself. I only played 3 defenses across my 150 set this week. The Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Broncos. So really liked incorporating the Chargers into this build. And then your 2 final pieces are Cade Otton and Cedric Tillman. Again, the 2 best value plays on the slate. So a really sharp roster here, Vinny. Great build, and congrats on the submission and the bink this week. So the next roster comes from Inner Circle member AQ172. It is a $10 5 max. And as you see, this is a Jameis Winston triple stack with Tillman, Njoku, and Jerry Jeudy. So something we spoke about on Discord throughout the weekend was this giant player block. So including Jameis at a combined salary of $18,400, you essentially needed a little under 74 points to keep you on a 200-point pace. So we did see Jameis Winston throw the ball 40 or 41 times, and the block ended up scoring 86.5 points, puts you on a 235-point pace. So I really liked this start, kind of allowed you so much flexibility with your salary. You brought it back with Derrick Henry, so I liked leaning into this game. And then, so saving salary on the the whole Cleveland player block allowed you to play not only Henry, but also Saquon Barkley and Jamar Chase in a mini correlation. So I really liked leaning into that Philly Cincy game as kind of one that could turn into kind of that had to have it game environment. And you kind of pick the 2 most likely pieces to explode in that game. So your final piece on this roster is Khalif Raymond. I thought that was a nice kind of low-owned punt play here. Someone who might take a step forward with more usage with Jameson Williams suspended. So a creative and smart way to get different. And then you've also got the Chargers D on this build as well. So thank you for the submission this week, AQ, and a nice build. Next roster comes from Inner Circle member Roll2112. It's a $50 single entry into the 1,100 entrant contest. And this is Jalen Hurts naked, and you brought it back with Andre Ishuash. So personally, I don't play unstacked quarterbacks, but you did get the rare run out where it works with Jalen Hurts rushing for 3 touchdowns. I think personally, I would have preferred to see Devonta Smith or A.J. Brown here instead of Tyreek Hill, but just my personal preference. So then you've got a mini correlation with Henry and Tillman. I liked that, kind of leaning into that game. The roster also features both Kareem Hunt and Joe Mixon, both really strong pieces in solid game environments. I really liked that. Played a bunch of both of them myself. And then you also have some more uncorrelated pieces with Tyreek Hill and Cade Otton. So all of those plays on their own are solid. They're solid pieces. I probably just personally would rather see a little bit more correlation on this build. As we say every week, it doesn't mean that an uncorrelated roster can't win. It's just more things that you have to get right. So appreciate the submission this week, Rolau. As you see, more than a min cash, and appreciate the submission. So the next roster comes from Inner Circle member Gerald Perville. It is a $5 roster into the large flea flicker, which is, I think, around a 60,000 entrant contest. This is a Jaden Daniels double stack with both Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz, and you brought it back with Swift. So creative, low-owned stack. After the early games with Jameis Winston and Hurts both putting up really strong scores, you needed to play a quarterback in the late games that could equal them. And I thought those only options were either Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, or even Bo Nix from a price considered standpoint. So I liked this approach, but generally I prefer a mobile quarterback like Jaden Daniels as a skinny stack, as his ceiling performance generally comes from utilizing his legs with a rushing touchdown added in there. The roster also features Devon A. Chan and Tyreek Hill. As previously discussed, really liked leaning in there with how underpriced the Dolphins skill position players were with the return of Tua Tagovailoa. So I liked rostering both on this build. You've then got Cedric Tillman and Calvin Ridley as one-offs. Both guys I was super high on. I liked that. I think the only suggestion I would have for this roster is I would rather have probably seen Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely instead of Zach Ertz to correlate with Tillman, and not a double stack of Jaden Daniels, but that's just my personal preference. But a nice build. Thank you for the submission this week, Gerald. So the next roster comes from Inner Circle member Big Ben, Big 10. It is a $5 single entry into the 19,000 entrant contest. And as you see, this is a Jameis Winston double stack with both Cedric Tillman and David Njoku. Brought it back with Rashad Bateman. So Jameis Winston doubles, very popular amongst OWS this week. And I don't mind Rashad Bateman here as a run back, kind of leaning into Zay Flowers potentially not being 100%. As we'll talk about, I think in the wrap, I got close to 40 rosters again this week. Over 30 of them were Jameis Winston builds. So probably a little lighter on the rosters we're going to review this week, because how many Jameis Winston doubles do you guys really want me to talk through? This roster then has Breece Hall and the Jets D. So Big Ben, I really liked that. We previously seen Breece Hall get a ton of opportunities the past 2 weeks, and I liked pairing him with his defense against Drake May, making his second career start. So I thought that was sharp. Your roster here also features Tyreek Hill and Tank Dell as one-offs, as well as Kenneth Walker. All strong plays that we've already kind of discussed, but I really did like leaning into both Tyreek Hill as well as Tank Dell. I thought that the Texans were in a really strong spot with some consolidated places for the ball to go. So personally, I played a rule of one of Dell, Diggs, Mixon, or Schultz on every roster. So I liked rostering Tank Dell here at lower ownership. I think overall this is a solid roster. Just didn't come together for you this week. But thank you for the submission, Big Ben, Big 10. So the final roster the final user submitted roster we're going to review comes from Inner Circle member Sukram, Sukram, and this is a $27 single entry. As you see, this is a Green Bay and Jacksonville game overstack. So you've got Jordan Love in a double stack with both Jaden Reed and Romeo Dobbs. And you brought it back with both Evan Engram and Tank Bigsby. So I like this construction, but not a game that I had heavy exposure on. I just didn't think that Jordan Love had the upside at 7,100 to give you a tournament-worthy score. So, like in his career, he only has 2 games above 28 fantasy points, one being 28.4. with his best career game coming in week 4 of this season, where he hit 34.2 points in a game against the Vikings where he threw 54 pass attempts. So, and even that game at 34 points still isn't even a 5x score. So to me, this is on a 13 game slate with 26 quarterbacks. I didn't think that Jordan Love offered you the upside that you'd likely need to win a tournament this week. But I digress. So the roster also features Joe Mixon as a one-off. I really liked that. And I didn't mind McMillan or Andrews either as one-offs here. However, I probably would have preferred leaning into the Tillman or Cade Otton chalk with how different the rest of this roster already is. Again, this is a 1,500 entrant, really small field contest. So once you are so different with your Jordan Love double stack, like this game Overstack, I feel like you probably want to be leaning into the chalk a little bit more. Or if you're going to play a roster like this with so many low owned pieces, this is probably a roster I'd prefer in a larger field tournament. You even have the Lions here at 2% ownership as well. So thank you for the submission this week. The final roster we'll review today is one of my single entries. Since we had so many Jameis lineups, which is what my $50 and $27 single entries both were, we're actually going to look at a $12 single entry just to kind of get a different feel, a different perspective on the slate. As you see, this is a CJ Stroud double stack with Joe Mixon and Dalton Schultz. No bring back. I always like a double stack with a pocket passer. Really like the spot for Stroud this week. And always a big fan of incorporating the RB1, especially if they are involved in the passing game, along with a pass catcher as part of a 3-man stack. The roster also features James Conner and Tyreek Hill in a mini correlation. So we spoke about the Dolphins pieces already, how I thought that they were all, most of them being $1,000 underpriced. And I liked to correlate almost all of my Tyreek Hill or Devon Achane builds with a Cardinal, either James Conner, Trey McBride, Harrison Jr. The roster then also has Cedric Tillman and Rashad Bateman in a mini correlation. Was kind of leaning into the Zay Flowers return as not being 100%. Did play Flowers as part of my pool, but on this particular build, looked at Rashad Bateman. And then the roster final two pieces are Kareem Hunt and the Chiefs D. Hunt coming off games of 28 and 24 touches. And every single team's DST that had faced the Raiders this season had either put up their best or second best score of the season. So I liked that correlation. Funny enough, it held true, as 8 DK points was Kansas City's second best defensive score of the season. And Kareem Hunt was as involved as expected. He did have 22 touches, just wasn't effective despite a positive game script for him here. So that will do it for us this week. Thanks again for tuning in and for all of the roster submissions. A really huge week for the OWS Fam. Lots of 4-figure and 5-figure cashes and banks this week. Again, a week where I got close to 40 submissions. So apologies if I didn't get to yours this week, but please do submit again next week and I will do my best to feature your roster. So with that, I will see you around Discord and the site this week. And I hope to see you and your OWS avatar at the top of the leaderboard again in week 9. Thanks again for tuning in.